We see state taxes come to around $42 billion this year from a variety of sources. Now, you've spoken about this in the past. We understand Victoria doesn't have the same resource base that other states have, so we do rely on levies and taxes on things like property, on business. I was going to ask you about one of these. You suggested yesterday in The Guardian that you might be open to reforming stamp duty. Now, we know that stamp duty presents a significant barrier to people buying and moving and discourages downsizing. I'd like your assessment. What are the barriers in terms of Victoria moving away from stamp duty towards a broad-based land tax?
Thank you, Mr Puglioli, and I think in relation to comments that I've made in a range of settings, as Treasurer, I always remain open to reforms in relation to tax. That's not to suggest wholesale changes, but in terms of getting feedback from people, of course, absolutely. In relation to your question about housing, increasing in housing and getting more people into houses, there are a range of levers that government has, and the biggest one is supply. And I'm sure that you'll be able to go into great depths with the Planning Minister and the Health and the Housing Minister in relation to some of those. In relation to and thank you for pointing out the disadvantage that we face in Victoria with our ability to raise revenue. When you look at states like WA and Queensland that have got royalty revenues that basically prop up the state, we just don't have the same luxury effectively. So yes, we have to look at a range of other measures to ensure that we can provide the services that Victorians rely on, and property taxes make up some of that, along with payroll tax. You asked about stamp duty. It is in relation to the tax line items that make up the majority of our income. It is payroll tax, stamp duty and land tax. You asked about whether you could move away from stamp duty to more of a land tax, which is what we have done in the commercial and industrial space. I know that there is some argument for consideration in the residential space. Implementation of such a policy would be very financially costly at the start, which means that it would be not possible at this point in time to make a decision such as that.
Do you still view investing in fossil fuels as a wise investment?
It is important to fund transition pathways, and some fossil fuels will be required to get us to a net zero position.
Thank you. Do you have a plan to divest entirely?
Not at this point.
Is there a rationale as to why?
We have a net zero target of 2050, so over the course of that pathway, there will be transition primarily out of fossil fuels.
Thank you. And let's go to that actually, because I understand that target extends beyond the government's target of net zero emissions by 2045. Why is that the case, and are there plans to update that date to align exactly?
So thank you for your question. The Victorian government actually brought forward their commitment to achieve net zero from 2050 to 2045 when VFMC committed to our net zero target by 2050 in 2021. At that time, it was consistent with the Victorian government's commitment. As a global investor, we have the same commitment as most global investors do. We believe that the impacts and effects of climate change are systemic and they pose widespread risks. We support the aims of both COP26 and the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. We make significant commitments around net zero portfolio greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We haven't revised those targets at this point in time.
This week, a range of public sector workers have come out with an alternative to what is being pursued. They're calling it the Gold Review. The review argues that large-scale job losses can be avoided in part by culling, in their words, 450 executive-level roles. Are you prepared to target executive-level staff through incoming cuts?
Thank you for your question, and I don't want to preempt the final report from the Silver Review, but executive positions are in scope.
Okay. How about cutting the use of consultants in the public service?
We should always be looking to do that. There'll be, again, I don't want to preempt a report that I haven't received yet, but it would be my expectation that all departments take stock of any outsourcing that can be in-house. It's a position that I've had for some time, and there's been a lot of good work across government in relation to that. I think it is only prudent when we're looking at reducing the size of the public sector that it is not a perverse outcome that services are then provided by someone else. That is not something that is the intention of this review. This is not about outsourcing the public service. This is about efficiency, consolidation and best practice.
Can I ask, in relation to automation, does that mean jobs lost to AI?
I wouldn't probably characterise it like that. We're not replacing humans with robots, but we are certainly looking at efficiencies and technology and ensuring that people can do their job as effectively as possible. I think in relation to the opportunities for AI, I think the ability for people to do their job, to be assisted to do their job, I think there's some great opportunities in that respect, and I know that the Department of Government Services is leading a lot of work in that regard, freeing up people from repetitive tasks so they can really target their work into the things that matter most to the Victorian community, I think is worthwhile work to do.
Thank you. Just moving on, with regards to international students,
Yep.
There's a note in the budget paper 3, bottom of page 146, that there's been a change from growing the number of international students to continued support because of national policy changes. Can I ask, would you prefer to be growing Victoria's market share of international student enrolments?
That would be my position, Mr Pugliali.
In relation to your role as separately and your position, which you've just put on record, are you advocating federally for a higher number of international students to be admitted in Victoria?
I'm on the record of my support, but it's not my role.
I might move on to the tariffs from the USA, if that's all right. Budget paper 2, page 25. It's been a few months now since the US trade tariffs have been in place, and I'd be keen to discuss the modelled and the actual impacts that these are having on our state. You've spoken about the significant value of food and beverage products, for example, that Victoria exports to the US. So I just ask, now these tariffs are in place, what impact can we expect these to have on our export of pharmaceutical products to the US, given last financial year we exported $1.6 billion worth of these products?
Yeah, good question, and you've picked up the current situation quite well. Our direct exposure from higher US tariffs on Australian goods and exports is relatively modest. However, we are watching the indirect effects of Victoria's trade partners because instability causes caution, which can reduce opportunity. So we're keeping an eye on that. You've specifically mentioned pharmaceutical products. They are, alongside beef, Victoria's biggest exposure to the US tariff decisions. And in relation to pharmaceutical products, that is a market of around 1.4 billion. I've been advised by my department, and the Minister for Finance will be might be able to explore this a little bit further with you as well, but advised that we are well placed to ride out the challenges because of the diverse economy and trading links with many of our other trading partners and countries, and we've got our offices across the globe to be able to look at diversification and other markets. We are expected to be less exposed. As I said, good exports accounted for only 7% of the Victorian economy, but in relation to pharmaceuticals, that is an exposure, and we'll continue to have conversations and certainly welcome the federal government's intervention and advocacy and opposition to some of the measures that have been made by the US administration. So that's about all of the information I've got at this time, but certainly happy to keep you updated through other means in relation to the impacts as they're realised or otherwise.
In relation to the tariffs themselves, what are farmers and producers telling government?
Interestingly, so the Victorian beef in particular is quite a high premium product. So people are already paying quite a lot for that product. So it is envisaged that people will continue to be happy to pay a premium amount because there are already a cohort of people that perhaps it's not something that a couple of dollars extra a kilo is necessarily going to impact them particularly. What we're also hearing, and again, I think the Minister for Finance will be able to go into this in some depth, is that in America, they don't have the beef that makes the best burgers. They need to mix their beef with our beef, which is basically because of the feeding practices that we have in Australia versus the US. So if Americans want to continue to have hamburgers, they're probably going to continue to require Australian beef. And as you've seen, the settings in the US in relation to tariffs have continued to change as impacts become realised on citizens of that country. So that's what producers are specifically telling us about. They're optimistic about the fact that their product is required across the globe. Doesn't mean that they are not looking at diversification and particularly opportunities in other countries, but that's what I'm hearing in some of the conversations I've had. But again, the Minister for Finance leads a lot of the trade policy in Victoria.
We know the government's negotiating a new EBA for Fire Rescue Victoria. Are you able to confirm, Minister, there won't be any reduction in FRV's minimum staffing levels at the end of that process?
Yes.
Great. Great.
I went through this in some detail in relation to it got conflated as an issue in the Emergency Services and Volunteer Fund legislation, and although it was not part of that bill, I was asked to confirm that there is no intention of the government to reduce firefighter numbers, whether it's in total or in relation to turnouts and the like, and I could confirm that that is not the government's intention and never has been.
Thank you. I'll move on to another issue, onto regional community leadership programs. Now, these programs were ceased for funding in 2023. As you'd appreciate, young women in regional areas have limited leadership opportunities. These programs provided a pathway for women who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be given these opportunities. What are you doing to support young women in the regions without that funding?
As you have rightly pointed out, I think in terms of a lot of the leadership programs, they were supported financially over many years with a commitment. Last time I was in the portfolio to identify opportunities to become self-sufficient, and some have indeed done that. I think coming back to some of the questioning that we were talking about in relation to the partnerships with the RDAs and our regional partnerships, there is an opportunity for representatives from regional areas, and we certainly look for diversity. We look for young people. We look for female representatives in particular, and I think if we were to look at the list of people that are in regional partnerships, you would agree that we've done well in relation to diversity and a range of views who represent regional communities.